Okay guys, so here we are in Logic, and I'm going to show you the three fundamental things that really help us make a sad beat or an emotional sounding beat. So what I've done here, I've taken you inside the project for my beat Rhapsody. If you want to download the beat so you can have a listen to it in its entirety, warriorsoundbeats.com, it's there. All the beats on there are free to download for like educational and demo purposes, so you can have a listen through them. So first thing to notice in this project, and sort of point number one, is there are literally only 9 channels happening, and 2 of them are just incidentals. One of them only occurs on the hook. So there's actually, in our main section just here, only a few elements playing. We've got some highs, we've got some hats, rides and tops going on, big fat snare, little bouncy kick drum, a plucked bass and the piano. That's it. So that is point number one. Some sparsity, some space, some emptiness. That tends to give a feeling of emotion and loneliness and sadness and space because there's very little going on. Now, I filled the whole spectrum of sound. We've got sub, we've got a nice kick, snare, smashes across the whole frequency. There's some tops, and the big piano chords fill up all of the other space. But overall, it's a pretty empty, spatial sounding track. So that's tip number one. Only use a few elements. Make sure they're all separate in the audio spectrum and give yourself space inside the track to give that feeling of space and emptiness, but still be sensible with it and make sure you do fill up the whole sound spectrum so you've still got a full sounding track. So point number 2 is tempo. So the tempo for this beat is really slow. We're right down at 75 BPM. If we take just the drums, for example, it becomes really obvious at just how slow we are. Just kind of plods along, but there's enough going on, and we use the hi-hats on all the intervals to keep everything moving forward. But the reason that we do a slower tempo, if you think emotionally about when you're sad, you tend to slow down, take time to reflect on things. You need to just pull that tempo back a little bit. So if we're looking at hip hop, like somewhere around sort of 88 to 95 are going to be our common BPMs, and we've wound that right back. We've really brought it slow just to give time and reflection in between each individual hit, and it really works when we've got all the timing of everything together. It leaves space for the sound to develop and emotion to take place. If you think when you're sad, you don't get hyped up and frantic and fast, you slow it down. So that's another thing we do. And the last one, and possibly one of the most important, is looking at our piano melody. So if we just select the melody and tap E here so we can see our notes. This track is in B minor, so we need to understand that key as well, and it's a minor key. And coupled with the fact that we've got some sparseness, the piano's got a real focus, it's going quite slow, although the piano's in sort of a double time because it's running in eighths, but for the most part, the chords are landing on the 1, 2, 3 and 4, but it's that minor key that gives it that somber feeling. Now you notice here, after we cross the 4th bar, we've also got a melody. And what I'm really making use of here are some very soft notes on top. And if we actually have a look at the notes themselves and their velocity, you'll notice that they're very, very low down, and that we're really making use of that velocity range. They could be sort of way up here, and it will give a completely different feel. As well as sounding awful. But by using a lot of softer, mellower notes, we again enforce that feeling of sadness. By having it in a minor key and running down from the higher notes to the lower, that also invokes that feeling as well. So it's that constant progression going down the minor key rather than up. Up tends to be more uplifting. In minor, that can still work and give like an uplifting feel. But if you go down the scale, that tends to be a little sadder. And when that works in hand with using these minor chord progressions here, it all feels kind of sad and emotional. When it comes to the chorus, I've used some staccato strings just to reinforce and add a difference, but they don't draw away. And again, they're still working in minor and they're working in some really soft notes. There's no harshness there. It's all mellow and controlled. And the last thing that adds a lot of feeling to it is the fugal horn here. And I've really left that on its own in the mix. It just has its own bit of space with lots of reverb on. And it gives that feeling of just standing alone, being a single element, which again reinforces that feeling of sadness. And that, guys, is how you make a sad feeling beat.